December 15th, 1944. The North Atlantic churned beneath a sky heavy with iron-grey clouds as Lieutenant Commander Thomas Hartley gripped the periscope handles of the submarine HMS Tempest, his knuckles white against the cold metal. Through the lens he could see them, 16 cargo vessels, their hulls riding low in the water, with supplies desperately needed by German forces across occupied Europe. His crew believed they were about to witness a textbook approach, a careful calculation of angles and torpedo spreads. They had no idea their commander was about to ignore every rule in the naval manual. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. What they were about to witness would transform a routine patrol into one of the most audacious underwater engagements in the entire conflict, proving that sometimes the most reckless decision could yield the most extraordinary results. Thomas Hartley had spent 7 years in the Royal Navy, 3 of them prowling the depths in submarines. At 32 years old, he was neither the youngest nor the oldest commander in the fleet, but he had earned a reputation for methodical precision. His service record contained no reprimands, no reckless actions, nothing to suggest the man who would emerge on that December morning. Born in Portsmouth to a family of fishermen, he had grown up understanding the sea's moods, its temperaments, the way currents moved and storms developed. His crew of 48 men trusted him completely. Executive Officer Lieutenant James Morrison had served with Hartley for 18 months and had never seen his commander make an impulsive decision. Morrison stood beside him now in the cramped control room, watching as Hartley studied the convoy through the periscope. The air inside the Tempest smelled of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of recycled air. They had been submerged for 6 hours, tracking the convoy since dawn, when their radio operator had intercepted German communications about a major supply run. Hartley lowered the periscope and turned to face his officers. His blue eyes, usually calm and calculating, held an intensity that Morrison had never witnessed before. The commander pulled out a chart and spread it across the navigation table. His finger traced the convoy's route, a path that would take them through a narrow channel between 2 underwater ridges. "They are moving in a defensive formation," Hartley said quietly, his voice barely audible above the hum of the electric motors. 4 escort vessels, probably destroyers, surrounding the cargo ships. Standard doctrine would be to pick off stragglers, maybe get 1 or 2 torpedoes into the formation before diving deep and running. Morrison nodded. That was indeed standard doctrine, proven tactics that kept submarines and their crews alive. "What are you proposing, sir?" Hartley looked at each man in the control room, his sonar operator, Petty Officer David Chen, a brilliant technician from Liverpool, his helmsman, Seaman First Class Robert MacLeod, steady hands from the Scottish Highlands, his torpedo officer, Lieutenant Peter Ashworth, precise and unflinching, all of them waiting for orders. "I am proposing we surface," Hartley said. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison felt his stomach drop. Surface? In daylight? Within range of 4 destroyers and whatever anti-aircraft guns those cargo vessels carried? It was suicide. "Sir," Morrison began carefully, "surfacing would expose us to every gun in that convoy. Our deck gun cannot compete with their combined firepower. We would be torn apart in minutes." Hartley shook his head. "Not if we do it at point-blank range, not if we surface in the middle of their formation." Now the control room erupted in whispered protests. Chen turned from his sonar station, his face pale. MacLeod's hands tightened on the helm controls. Ashworth opened his mouth, closed it, then finally spoke. "Commander, with respect, that violates every tactical principle we have been taught. We would have no room to maneuver, no escape route. 1 depth charge and we are finished." Hartley understood their fear because he felt it too. His hands were steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Yet something in his gut, some instinct developed from years at sea, told him this could work. The Germans would not expect it. No submarine commander in his right mind would surface in the center of an enemy convoy. That very impossibility was his advantage. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Those cargo ships are riding low, they are carrying fuel, ammunition, vehicles, everything the German forces need to continue the conflict. Intelligence reports suggest this is one of the largest supply runs in months. If we sink even half of those ships, We could significantly impact their operations for weeks, maybe months. Morrison stepped closer. And if we fail? If we surface and they destroy us before we can fire a single shell? Hartley met his executive officer's gaze. Then we fail. But if we do not try, those supplies reach their destination. More Allied soldiers face better equipped opponents. More of our friends perish because we played it safe. The weight of that statement settled over the control room. Every man there had lost friends, brothers, fellow sailors to this conflict. The war had been grinding on for over 5 years now, and everyone was exhausted, desperate for anything that might shorten it even by a day. Morrison looked at the faces around him, then back at Hartley. "What exactly are you proposing, sir?" Hartley turned back to the chart. "We come up beneath them, right in the center of their formation. We will be so close they cannot depress their guns low enough to hit us. We surface, man the deck gun, and we fire at the cargo vessels from 200 meters. The escorts will panic, worried about hitting their own ships. By the time they react properly, we will have already done significant damage. Then we dive, go deep, and use the confusion to escape." Ashworth leaned over the chart, his mind working through the mathematics. "We would need to surface with extreme precision. Too far from any one ship, and we are an open target. Too close, and we risk collision." Chen spoke up from the sonar station. "Sir, I can guide you in. I have been tracking their formation for hours. I know the spacing between each vessel." Hartley nodded. "That is exactly what I need. Ashworth, calculate firing solutions for the deck gun. I want targets prioritized by cargo value. Fuel tankers first, then ammunition carriers. Morrison, you will supervise the gun crew. I need that weapon ready to fire the instant we break surface." Morrison felt his training warring with his instincts. Everything he knew said this was madness. Yet he had also learned to trust Hartley's judgment. The commander had brought them through 14 patrols without losing a single man. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. "Sir," Morrison said slowly, "the crew will need to hear this from you. If we are going to do something this dangerous, they deserve to know why." Hartley keyed the intercom that connected to every compartment of the submarine. "All hands, this is the commander. I know you have heard rumors about the convoy we are tracking. I am going to be direct with you. We have an opportunity to strike a significant blow, but it will require us to take an extraordinary risk. We are going to surface in the middle of that convoy and engage them with our deck gun at close range." He paused, letting that sink in. Through the submarine, he could imagine the reactions. Shock, fear, maybe anger that their commander would put them in such danger. "I will not order any man to participate in this action against his conscience. If you believe this is wrong, I understand. But I also believe we have a duty to do everything in our power to end this conflict. Those ships are carrying supplies that will be used against our allies, against our countrymen. We have a chance to stop that right here, right now. I am asking you to trust me one more time. Hartley out." The intercom clicked off. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, from the torpedo room, a voice called out, "Ready when you are, sir." From the engine room, "Standing by, Commander." From the galley, the radio room, the crew quarters, voices of men who had decided to trust their captain one more time. Morrison felt a lump in his throat. These men, these ordinary sailors from every corner of Britain, were willing to follow Hartley into what might be certain death. He straightened his shoulders and looked at his commander. "Give the order, sir. We are ready." Hartley returned to the periscope, his movements calm and deliberate despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Chen, give me a path to the center of their formation. Helm, prepare for rapid ascent. Ashworth, I want that deck gun crew ready to move the moment we breach. Morrison, with me. We are going topside." The Tempest turned, her electric motors whining softly as she adjusted course. Chen called out bearings and distances, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. The submarine crept forward, rising gradually from 200 feet to 150, then to 100. Through the periscope, Hartley could see the hulls of the cargo ships passing overhead, dark shapes against the lighter water above. They were massive, some of them 10,000 tons or more, their propellers churning the water into white froth. The destroyers prowled the edges of the formation, sleek and deadly, their sonar pinging rhythmically as they searched for threats. 80 feet, Chen called out. You should be directly beneath the center of the formation now, sir. Hartley took one last look through the periscope. He could see a fuel tanker to his left, an ammunition carrier to his right, a cargo vessel loaded with vehicles directly ahead. Perfect. Take us up, he ordered. Emergency surface. Go, go, go. The diving officer yanked controls, blowing ballast tanks with compressed air. The Tempest leaped upward like a cork released underwater, rising at an angle that had everyone grabbing for handholds. Hartley and Morrison scrambled up the ladder to the conning tower, Morrison carrying the signal flags they would need to communicate with the gun crew. The submarine broke the surface with a tremendous splash, seawater cascading off her hull. Hartley threw open the hatch and scrambled out onto the bridge, Morrison right behind him. The deck gun crew was already emerging from the forward hatch, moving with practiced efficiency, despite the absolute chaos around them. They had surfaced in the middle of hell. The convoy surrounded them on all sides, the massive cargo ships looming like steel cliffs. The nearest vessel was barely 150 meters away, so close that Hartley could see the shocked faces of German sailors on her deck. Alarms were shrieking across the water. Signal lamps flashed frantically as the destroyers tried to understand what had just happened. "Gun crew, target that tanker," Hartley shouted, pointing at the fuel carrier to port. "Fire as fast as you can load." The deck gun, a 3-inch weapon designed for surface engagements, swung toward the tanker. The gun captain, Chief Petty Officer William Hayes, a veteran of the first global conflict, sighted down the barrel. At this range, he could hardly miss. The gun roared, its report echoing across the water. The shell struck the tanker at the waterline, punching through the thin hull plating. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the fuel inside ignited. The explosion was catastrophic. A pillar of orange flame erupted from the tanker's side, climbing hundreds of feet into the air. The shockwave rippled across the water, making the Tempest rock violently. Burning fuel spread across the ocean surface, creating a wall of fire between the submarine and several of the cargo ships. Hayes did not wait to admire his work. His crew was already loading another shell. The gun swung to the right, targeting the ammunition carrier. The second shot struck true, and this explosion was even more violent. The ammunition carrier seemed to lift out of the water, her back breaking, both ends tilting toward the sky as secondary explosions rippled through her hull. The German destroyers had recovered from their shock and were turning inward, but just as Hartley had predicted, they hesitated. The burning tanker and exploding ammunition ship were creating chaos in the formation. The cargo vessels were trying to scatter, some turning hard to port, others to starboard, threatening to collide with each other. Hayes and his crew worked like machines. A third shell, a fourth, a fifth, each one found its mark. A cargo ship carrying vehicles took a hit to her cargo holds, and soon trucks and tanks were tumbling into the sea as the ship listed heavily. Another tanker erupted in flames. The deck gun's barrel was so hot it glowed in the pale morning light. Morrison stood beside Hartley on the bridge, his job to watch for incoming fire. So far, the Germans seemed paralyzed by confusion. Then he saw it. One of the destroyers had cleared the edge of the formation and was turning to bring her guns to bear. "Destroyer bearing 320, he shouted. "She has a firing solution." Hartley saw it too. The destroyer was less than a kilometer away, her forward guns swinging toward the Tempest. In seconds, they would open fire, and no submarine could withstand that kind of punishment. "Hayes, 2 more shots, then we dive," Hartley called. "Make them count." The chief petty officer nodded grimly. His crew swung the gun toward a massive cargo vessel that intelligence had identified as carrying critical engine parts and manufacturing equipment. The shell struck her amidships, and though there was no dramatic explosion, Hartley could see the ship beginning to settle, taking on water. The destroyer's guns flashed. Shells screamed overhead, missing by meters. The gun crew flinched but held their positions. One more shot. Hayes aimed carefully at another fuel tanker, closer than the first. The gun fired. This time, the explosion was so violent it knocked several men off their feet. The tanker's entire forward section vanished in a ball of flame. The Tempest was close enough that burning debris began raining down on her deck. "Clear the deck! Emergency dive!" Hartley shouted. Hayes and his crew scrambled for the hatch, diving through it even as more shells from the destroyer screamed past. Morrison followed them down, and Hartley took one last look at the chaos they had created. 8 ships were burning or sinking, 8 out of 16. Half the convoy destroyed or crippled in less than 4 minutes. The sea was a nightmare of flames, debris, and drowning men. It was terrible and necessary, and Hartley felt the weight of it even as he dropped through the hatch and sealed it behind him. "Take us down fast and deep," he ordered, stumbling into the control room. 300 feet stern-down angle, all ahead full. The Tempest dove, her hull groaning under the strain. Behind them, depth charges began to explode. The destroyers finally organized enough to counterattack. The submarine shook with each blast, light bulbs shattering, men thrown against bulkheads. Chen called out bearings and distances, helping the helmsman navigate away from the hunting destroyers. 100 feet, 150, 200. The depth charges kept coming, some close enough to make the hull ring like a bell. At 250 feet, a particularly close explosion knocked out the lights. They ran in darkness for 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours before the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. 300 feet. Hartley leveled the submarine and reduced speed to minimize noise. Above them, the destroyers crisscrossed back and forth, their sonar pinging continuously. But the Tempest was deep and quiet, and the burning wreckage above created enough acoustic confusion to mask their retreat. For 2 hours, they crept away at silent running speed, every man barely breathing, listening to the sounds of the hunt gradually fading behind them. When Chen finally reported that the destroyers had given up the search, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the submarine. Hartley slumped against the periscope housing, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. Morrison appeared with 2 mugs of tea, both of them shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. "We did it," Morrison said quietly. "We actually did it." Hartley nodded, sipping the hot tea. "How is the crew?" "Some bumps and bruises from the depth charging, but nothing serious. Hayes says the deck gun is still operational, though it will need a new barrel soon. We expended 32 shells." "And the convoy?" Morrison consulted a notepad. "Based on what we observed before diving, we confirmed 8 ships hit. 3 fuel tankers completely destroyed, 2 ammunition carriers destroyed, 1 cargo ship with vehicles sinking, 2 general cargo ships heavily damaged and probably sinking. Conservative estimate, we destroyed or crippled half the convoy." The magnitude of it began to sink in. In 4 minutes of surface action, they had done more damage than most submarines achieved in an entire patrol. The supplies on those ships, supplies that would never reach German forces across occupied Europe, represented a significant blow to enemy logistics. But Hartley also thought about the cost. The German sailors on those ships, many of them likely not much different from his own crew, ordinary men caught in extraordinary circumstances. War demanded these actions, but it also demanded that he recognize the human cost on both sides. "Log it accurately," he told Morrison. "Every detail. This action will be studied, analyzed, probably criticized by command. They need the full picture." Over the next 3 days, the Tempest made her way back to her base at Scapa Flow in Scotland. The journey was quiet, the crew processing what they had experienced. Some of the men were jubilant, celebrating their success. Others were more subdued, thinking about how close they had come to disaster. When they finally surfaced in friendly waters and radioed ahead their return, the response was immediate and startling. The Admiralty already knew about the convoy attack. German radio traffic had been frantic, and Allied intelligence had intercepted enough to piece together what had happened. A British submarine had somehow surfaced in the middle of a major convoy and destroyed half of it before escaping. They just had not known which submarine until now. The Tempest entered Scapa Flow to find the harbor, lined with ships sounding their horns in salute. It was unprecedented. As they tied up at the dock, Hartley could see a crowd waiting. Officers in dress uniforms, intelligence personnel with folders and cameras, even a few reporters despite wartime security restrictions. Admiral Sir Charles Morton, commander of the submarine flotilla, was the first to board. He was a stern man in his 60s, a veteran of the first global conflict, not given to emotional displays. He shook Hartley's hand with a grip like iron. "Commander Hartley," he said formally. I have read your preliminary radio report. I would very much like to hear the full story. Over the next several hours, Hartley and his officers were debriefed in exhaustive detail. Every decision, every action, every minute of the engagement was examined and recorded. The intelligence officers were particularly interested in the German convoy's defensive formation and how the Tempest had exploited its weaknesses. Admiral Morton listened without comment until Hartley finished his account. Then he sat back in his chair and studied the young commander for a long moment. "You violated standing orders," he said finally. "You knowingly put your submarine and crew in extreme danger by surfacing in daylight within range of enemy weapons. By all rights, I should relieve you of command." Hartley met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I understand." Morton's stern expression cracked into the slightest smile. "I should relieve you of command, but I will not, because your action, while reckless, achieved results that 3 submarines operating conventionally might not have managed. Those 8 ships represented a significant portion of German supply capacity for this quarter. Intelligence estimates that your attack may have delayed certain operations by weeks or even months." He stood and extended his hand again. "Well done, Commander. Extremely well done. However, I must insist that this remains an exceptional circumstance, not a new tactical doctrine. We cannot have every submarine commander surfacing in the middle of enemy formations." Hartley allowed himself a small smile. "Understood, sir. I have no intention of making a habit of it." The Tempest and her crew received commendations, and Hartley was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for exceptional leadership under combat conditions. But what mattered more to him was that his crew had survived and succeeded. In the months that followed, the story of the Tempest's audacious attack spread through the submarine service. It became a legend told and retold in ready rooms and officers' messes. Some of the details were embellished with each telling, but the core truth remained. One submarine commander had gambled everything on an impossible plan and won. The German convoy attack had another, less visible effect. Allied intelligence noted that subsequent German convoy operations became more cautious, more heavily defended, and took longer routes to avoid potential submarine ambushes. The psychological impact of knowing that a submarine might surface in the middle of your formation and start firing created a level of paranoia that affected German naval logistics for the remainder of the conflict. Hayes, the chief petty officer who had commanded the deck gun during the attack, later said that those 4 minutes of surface action had been the longest and shortest of his life. "Time does strange things when you are standing on an open deck with shells flying past your head," he recalled. "Every second felt like an hour, but looking back, it seemed like we blinked, and it was over." Chen, the sonar operator who had guided them into position, received a commendation for his precise navigation work. He later became an instructor, teaching new sonar operators the importance of maintaining complete situational awareness, even in the most stressful situations. Morrison, the executive officer who had initially questioned the plan, went on to command his own submarine later in the conflict. He often told his own crews about the day his commander had proposed something impossible, and how sometimes the impossible was exactly what the situation required. For Hartley himself, the attack marked a turning point. He completed 3 more patrols before the end of the conflict, all of them successful by conventional standards, but none as dramatic as that December morning in 1944. After the war ended, he left the Navy and returned to Portsmouth, where he worked as a marine engineer and raised a family. He rarely spoke about his wartime service, particularly the convoy attack. When pressed by his children or grandchildren, he would say only that war forced people to make impossible decisions, and that he was grateful his crew had trusted him enough to follow through. In the official history of submarine operations during the conflict, the Tempest's attack merited a full chapter. Naval historians studied it as an example of tactical innovation under pressure, of how understanding your enemy's psychology could create opportunities that conventional tactics would miss. The fact that the German destroyers had hesitated, afraid of hitting their own ships, had been the key to success. But more than the tactical lessons, the story represented something deeper about leadership and trust. Hartley had asked his crew to believe in him when every instinct said his plan was suicidal. They had chosen to trust him, not because they understood his reasoning, but because his previous actions had earned that trust, and he had honored that trust by bringing them through successfully. The 8 ships destroyed or crippled that day represented thousands of tons of fuel, ammunition, vehicles, and supplies that never reached German forces. The strategic impact was significant, but difficult to quantify precisely. How many Allied soldiers were saved because German forces lacked fuel for their vehicles? How many lives were preserved because ammunition never arrived? These questions could never be answered with certainty, but the effect was real. Several of the Tempest's crew remained in contact for decades after the conflict ended. They would gather every few years for reunions, growing older, their numbers gradually diminishing as time took its toll. At these gatherings, they would invariably tell the story of the Convoy attack, each man adding his own perspective, his own memories of those 4 impossible minutes. MacLeod, the helmsman who had controlled the submarine during the emergency surface and dive, later said that the hardest part had been maintaining his composure while knowing that one mistake, one moment of panic, could have doomed them all. The commander's calm voice giving orders was what kept me steady, he recalled. If he had shown fear, we would have all fallen apart. The Tempest herself survived the war and served for several more years before being decommissioned. Some of her crew attended the ceremony when she was finally retired from service, a bittersweet occasion that marked the end of an era. The submarine that had carried them through so many dangers, that had been their home and protection in the hostile depths, was being sent to the breakers. But the legacy of that December attack lived on. It became a case study at naval academies, an example of how creative thinking and calculated risk could achieve extraordinary results. Young officers studied Hartley's decision-making process, the way he had balanced the potential reward against the terrible risk, and how he had prepared his crew to execute a plan that seemed to violate every principle of submarine warfare. What those students often missed, however, was the human element. The statistics and tactics could be taught, but the trust between Hartley and his crew, the willingness of 48 men to follow their commander into what appeared to be certain death, that could not be reduced to a formula or doctrine. It was the product of months of shared experience, of seeing their commander make good decisions consistently, of knowing that he valued their lives and would not waste them carelessly. Hartley himself, in one of his rare interviews many years later, was asked what he would say to his younger self before the attack. He thought for a long moment before answering. "I would tell him to trust his instincts, but also to remember that those instincts were shaped by the men around him. I did not make that decision alone. I made it because I knew my crew was capable of executing it, because Chen could navigate us in, because Hayes could shoot straight under pressure, because Morrison would keep the deck gun crew organized." Leadership is not about making decisions in isolation. It is about understanding the capabilities of your people and putting them in positions to succeed. The German perspective on the attack was harder to reconstruct, as many of the relevant records were lost in the final days of the conflict. However, some survivor accounts from the convoy did surface in later years. One German naval officer, who had been on one of the destroyers that day, wrote in his memoirs about the shock of seeing a British submarine surface in the middle of the formation. "We thought at first it must be one of ours, that there had been some terrible mistake," he wrote. "Then the firing started, and we realized what was happening. But by then it was too late. The submarine had created such chaos that we could not respond effectively without risking our own ships." This account validated Hartley's assessment of the German psychology. The defenders had been paralyzed not just by surprise, but by their own doctrine, which prioritized protecting the cargo vessels above all else. The Tempest's presence in the middle of the formation had created an impossible tactical situation where any aggressive response risked friendly fire. The years passed, and the generation that had fought the conflict gradually passed with them. Hartley died in 1993 at the age of 81, surrounded by his family. His funeral was attended by 7 surviving members of the Tempest's crew, old men now, but still bound by the experiences they had shared 5 decades earlier. They told stories, laughed, cried, and honored the memory of the commander who had led them through so much. Morrison, who outlived Hartley by 5 years, gave the eulogy. He spoke about courage, leadership, and trust, But he also spoke about the weight of command, the burden of making life and death decisions that affected not just yourself, but dozens of others. Tom Hartley carried that weight with grace, Morrison said. He made hard choices when they needed to be made, but he never forgot the human cost. That is what made him exceptional. The story of the Tempest's attack on the German convoy has continued to be told in the decades since, evolving from living memory into historical record. It appears in books about submarine warfare, in documentaries about the conflict, in lectures at naval academies around the world. Each telling emphasizes different aspects: the tactical innovation, the calculated risk, the flawless execution, the significant strategic impact. But at its heart, the story is about a group of men who faced an impossible situation and chose to trust each other. It is about a commander who saw an opportunity that others would have missed and had the courage to seize it. It is about a crew that believed in their leader enough to follow him into what appeared to be certain doom. And it is about how, sometimes, the most audacious plan is the one that succeeds precisely because no one expects it. The supplies that never reached their destination, the operations that were delayed or cancelled, the lives potentially saved by that 4-minute engagement, these are the measurable outcomes. But the intangible legacy, the example of leadership and trust under extreme pressure, may be even more valuable. In a conflict that often seemed to reduce human beings to mere numbers, to statistics of losses and gains, the story of the Tempest reminds us that individual decisions, individual courage, and individual trust could still make a profound difference. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.